Welcome, and thank you for joining us at Live at Your Table today, brought to you by the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Show. Before we get started with our discussion this morning, lease negotiating tactics for restaurants, we would like to share some housekeeping items to keep in mind. All audience members are in listen-only mode, which means you are muted. We will be monitoring audience engagement on the dashboard and do encourage you to participate by using the question pane. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please note this webinar is being recorded and will be available online at flrestaurantandlodgingshow.com next week, should you wish to revisit the content provided today. Now, without further delay, let me introduce Dale Willerton, founder of the Lease Coach. Dale, thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. It is a fantastic morning. I've been looking forward to this webinar all week. And of course, I've been doing a lot of speaking over the years for Clarion and the restaurant shows, so happy to be here. Now, I'll give you a quick, in case you're just coming on the webinar, this is what I look like this morning. I'm having a little bit of a nosebleed issue, so I'm gonna leave my camera off so I don't gross anybody out. And Andrea, you can't see me now, can you?
I cannot, Dale.
All right, well, that'll make for a better presentation because we won't be distracted. So there's two topics we're gonna have today, Andrea. One is the pandemic rent assistance and how that works for tenants. And one is topic two is going to be how to negotiate a lease renewal, because 20% of the restaurant owners are coming up on their lease renewal year, you know, and so it's really an important topic for us to consider and get into. So let's see here. All right, so the Lease Coach, you know, we started the Lease Coach in 1993. And before that, I used to work for Landlord. What you see on the picture here is a bunch of our coaches and myself, some of our offices across the US. You know, 50% of the businesses we work with are in the franchise industry. They're franchise restaurants, or they're other types of franchise industries. But the other 50% are independent restaurant owners and business owners. So, you know, prior to 1993, I used to work for Landlords. I was a shopping center manager and a leasing rep. But in 1993, I realized I should be on the other side. And of course, I'm a speaker at the restaurant show. I've actually owned one restaurant and one coffee shop, so I know what it's like to be a tenant. And personally, I've done about 1,500 lease deals for tenants over the years, and I've been married for 35 years. So there's my email address below if anybody needs to reach me after the session. So if you have not already negotiated for some rent relief with your landlord, there's a couple of points I want to bring up to you. There's a big deferral, number one, between a deferral and an abatement. Okay, a deferral means that you're going to repay this rent at some point in the future, typically not with interest, but they will defer it. Now, the idea here is to defer it as far as you can, 12 months, 24 months out. You're going to need more time to recover than you think. Now, there's also abatements. Now, an abatement is a forgiveness of rent. And I would say that the majority of landlords are doing deferrals. Some are doing abatements and some are doing combinations. I have maybe 20, 25 of these going on right now for tenants where we negotiate for them directly with the landlord. We've had a lot of success. So number two, when you approach your landlord for help, don't come out of the gate asking for help. What you want to do is you want to ask the landlord if they have a plan. Do they, you know, most landlords have hundreds of tenants. And so you're not going to be the first one to phone them and say, I need help. But you really want to say to them, do you have a plan? Because they might say, well, yeah, we're prepared to do this, this, and this for you. Well, now you can negotiate beyond that, okay? Instead of, you know, saying, I need 3 months of deferral or I need 2 months of rent abatement, they probably will offer something to you right out of the get-go. And then you can go forward from there. Number three, state your sales now compared to last year. This is really important because if you're wishy-washy or you're not very clear about the actual damage the pandemic is doing to your business, you might say, like I had a client yesterday that said they were down 62%. Now, that's good. The landlord needs to know you're down 62% because not all of you report your sales to the landlord. But if you could say, you know, last September we had $33,000. Excuse me, last September we had $95,000. This September we're down to $33,000. That really shows the amount of money that's not going through your cash registers. Number 4, be prepared to negotiate and counteroffer based on your paycheck protection program payment. Landlords are going to want to know if you've got government assistance. Most of them are going to want to see a profit and loss statement or some type of financials as well. So don't be thrown off by that. Now, when I was a shopping center manager, it was very common if a tenant did not pay rent, it was very common for us to send out a default letter or a notice of default. Landlords are sending these out all the time. Now, you have to take a default notice seriously, but don't let it rock your world. Don't let it throw you for a loop and suddenly you're just paralyzed. You can't do anything else. I have seen very, very few evictions. I've seen very few situations where the landlord was kicking a tenant out of a property, but it's almost their policy that if you're behind on the rent, they're going to notify you that you are in default. Doesn't mean they will take any action. Okay, so most landlords, here's the takeaway on this segment. Most landlords are helping their tenants, but they're helping them to different degrees. And the amount you negotiate can make a big difference between just getting a 3-month deferral and getting a package deal where you get a 3-month abatement and 6-month deferral, and you don't have to pay it back, for 18 months. There can be a lot to be negotiated here. So. But it's not usually that easy. The landlords, they put up a fuss. They've got their own problems, their own mortgages they have to pay on some of their buildings. So we're gonna segue into negotiate to win. So 13 costly mistakes restaurant tenants make negotiating their lease renewal. This is one of my favorite topics because I don't just specialize in negotiating lease renewals for restaurant owners. I specialize in negotiating rent reduction lease renewals. Now, it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking how many landlords right now are expecting tenants to pay a higher rent when their lease comes up for renewal. Okay. Now, that's in a normal time. That's normal. A landlord, if your lease is coming up for renewal after 5 or 10 years, the landlord normally wants an increase, but they're still asking for an increase during the pandemic. And of course, your sales are down and you can't afford to pay that. So we're going to go through some of the common mistakes that a restaurant owner will make. Not allowing enough time is mistake number 1. By starting the renewal process too late. At the Lease Coach, we like to approach the landlord at least 12 months in advance, sometimes 18 months in advance. If you're going to hit a brick wall, or if the landlord is going to be tough to deal with, you want to find that out as soon as possible. You don't want to find that out with 4 months left on your lease term, because you don't want to move your restaurant. It's too expensive to move your restaurant. That's not your goal. Our goal is to get you a renewal at a decent rental rate, but you really have to start the process well in advance. By the way, most of the time you would not exercise your renewal option. If you exercise your renewal option, it usually says in the fine print that rents can't go down, they can only go up. So mistake number 2, not playing the pandemic card and assuming the landlord understands what you are going through right now. Tenants, you're so close to your business, you're living it on a day-to-day basis. But your landlord does not know how bad you're hurting. Your landlord doesn't know that your expenses have gone up and you're buying all this personal protection equipment, and that some of your staff won't come to work. They'd rather stay home, and they don't know what you're going through. So you really have to play the pandemic card when you're negotiating your lease renewal, because this is not going away. Like, we got another year of this at least before the vaccine is readily available, as far as we can tell. Mistake number 3, negotiating with just your current landlord and failing to be pursued. So when we take on a tenant client and the restaurant owner says, well, I want you to negotiate my lease renewal. I say, well, okay, where would you go if you had to go? Where would you move? He says, well, I don't want to move. I say, I know you don't want to move, but where would you go? He said, I'd move down the street down here. I'd move over here. Well, we'll approach those landlords and we'll find out what deal they would do for you. See, too many tenants make the mistake of going to the landlord and saying, I want to renew my lease. Can we, do all this stuff? Really, I pick up the phone and I call the property manager and I say, Mr. Property Manager, I'm a consultant working with your restaurant tenant in this property. I know, they've been here for 9 years. Their lease is going to expire next year. Do you think the landlord wants the restaurant to stay for another term? And the property manager usually replies with, of course we want the restaurant to stay. They're not thinking of leaving, are they? Well, now you've got them. Now you've got them pursuing you. And that's really, really a critical stage that most restaurant owners miss. All right, let's go on to our next slide. Mistake number 4, telegraphing your intentions or giving buying signals and negotiating by email or text. So here again, tenants often sink themselves by saying the wrong thing. When I used to be a property manager, I would, a tenant was thinking, their lease was coming up for renewal, and I'd say, well, do you want to stay? And they'd say, well, of course we want to stay. Our restaurant's only 5 years old. We don't want to move. Well, you just sunk yourself. So don't telegraph your intentions. Find out if they want you to stay, and then under what terms. And then that's where your negotiation begins, okay? And try not to do too much texting on this. One of my restaurant clients on the West Coast emailed me yesterday, and she said, the landlord finally sent me a counter offer, and it was a 10-word text. What do you do with that text? How do you reply to that text? I said, you don't. You invite them to come over and you pour them a cup of coffee in your restaurant and you talk to them in person. Okay, personal interaction on the phone or face to face is really the way to go here. You should not be negotiating by text. I don't even negotiate by email. I use email to keep score. So if I'm talking to a property manager or a real estate agent or a landlord, after I talk to them, I'll usually sit down at my laptop and I'll send them an email saying, hey, Bob, thanks for talking with me today about ABC Restaurant. These are 3 things you're going to get from me. I've got 2 things you asked me to get the tenant from you, and we're going to talk again on Tuesday. So that's how I use email for the most part. Okay, mistake number 5 is not creating a relationship with the landlord in advance so you can assess your opponent. I have a client right now going through this. He's been in the location for 7 years and he's never met the landlord. He doesn't know who the landlord is. All he knows is the property manager. And now that his lease is coming up for renewal, he and the property manager is being difficult to deal with. He can't even go around her because he hasn't found out who the landlord is. You want to put relational deposits over the years. You want to make a deposit bank with your landlord. You want to get to know them. You want to make sure your landlord's eaten your food and been in your restaurant. Things like that are really, really important. I had on a different project, I had another restaurant, sort of a senior vice president tell me, oh yeah, I've been to that restaurant in the mall. I've eaten there. I really liked it. I thought the service was good. In other words, he was saying, I know your sales are down, but I don't think you're doing anything wrong, right? So we have an agreement. It's just the pandemic. Getting to know other tenants in the building. We're going to talk a little bit about that because other tenants will give you good information. By the way, some landlords are actually doing okay these days because they don't have a mortgage on their property, but other landlords are, they could be on the verge of losing their property. It could be a seven tenant strip plaza, that type of thing. So be proactive. Be proactive is my point. Mistake number 6, not measuring the risk and refusing to walk away from an unfair deal. So some of you, when you signed your original lease, gave a personal guarantee, but that personal guarantee is maybe no longer justified, right? How much risk do you actually pose to the landlord? Well, none really, and I'll explain why. If I walk into your place of business and I order a meal and I eat it and I walk out, you're pretty much screwed. You're not getting paid and you're not getting the meal back, right? But if you as a tenant don't pay your rent, the landlord doesn't lose the building, he doesn't lose the property. When you leave, he gets the space back and he rents it to another tenant. So the landlord's risk here is actually pretty minimal. And if you're putting up a personal guarantee or a personal guarantee for you and your spouse, you're really positioning yourself to be manhandled by the landlord. Most of the lease deals we do for tenants do not have personal guarantees. They don't even have deposits. Okay, so a personal guarantee is not legally required. It's negotiated. And so if I negotiated with the landlord to give you a tenant allowance, let's say of $150,000 and 6 months free rent, we might agree to a personal guarantee for, that the value of those incentives, and then it would decrease year after year after year till it got to the point where there was no personal guarantee at all. Okay, if you ever want to sell your restaurant, this will be one of the things you're fighting with your landlord over, because you're going to say, well, why can't the buyer of my restaurant give a personal guarantee and take mine off? No, the landlord's not going to do that. He's going to want you to keep your personal guarantee on, and he's going to want the buyer of your restaurant to put their personal guarantee on as well. So the landlord even has more protection. So be very careful with personal guarantees. This is my pet peeve clause in most lease agreements, because tenants are just too easily willing to give personal guarantees. And this pandemic is going to be the sort of the turning point on those personal guarantees for a lot of tenants. Mistake number 7, not asking or negotiating for more than you want or need deal-wise. And I see tenants do this all the time. And I'm going to share one example with you here. The tenant was a multi-unit franchisee, came to me. He said, I want to open up 3 more locations. Will you do my site selection? I said, sure, we do site selection. Went out. Before I went out, he said, one criteria. He said, I want to make sure I get 3 months of free rent. Okay. Now, to me, free rent is the period of time after you open your restaurant, not while you're building your restaurant. While you're building your restaurant, you should not pay any rent. So I went out, did a site selection, brought some locations back to him, and I said, now this is the location. This is a great deal, great property. This is the first one I want to do for you. But I did not get you 3 months of free rent. He said, well, I don't even want to take a look at it. I said, no, I got you 12 months of free rent, a 5-year lease with the first 12 months free. He was flabbergasted. He couldn't believe it, right? But here's my point. If he had been negotiating his own deal, what would have he asked for? He would have asked for 3 months of free rent because that's what he wanted. And then he would have settled, they would have counter-offered, and he would have gotten 2 or 1 month of free rent. And people often, when I'm giving live seminars in New York or Florida or California for Clarion, people are asking me, well, how did you get this guy 12 months of free rent? I said, well, I asked for 18 months. I literally asked for 18 months of free rent. They agreed on 12. That's a victory. That's what you want. When the lease coach takes on your project, we don't typically charge you $10 and save you $10. We try to save you 5 to 10 times our fee. Okay, we want to bring you more value. So this number 7 on your screen, mistake, not asking or negotiating for more than you want or need, also applies to tenant allowance. It applies to everything in the deal. So many of you are such nice people. I'd like to have many of you as my friends, but I would not let you negotiate the lease coach lease at one of my offices, because you would just give it away. You just would not be up to competing against a sophisticated landlord or their real estate broker. Mistake number 8, picking the wrong lease term, the renewal term, length of lease. So many of you right now have renewed your lease once already. You had a 5-year lease, you did a 5-year renewal, but during the pandemic, I'm doing a lot of 1- and 2-year lease renewals to get my client through the rough patch, because you may not make it. Things might get worse. The vaccine may be delayed. It may not come through. The government, even if the Democrats get into the White House, we may or may not see another round of government assistance payments, right? So it's really important that you balance the length of your lease term on your upcoming renewal, okay? You want to stay flexible. You want to stay nimble. Mistake number 9, neglecting to re-examine and renegotiating other critical non-rent deal points. And by the way, the reason you don't see me on the screen, if you're just joining, I had a little bit of a nosebleed right before the webinar started. So I'm leaving my camera off so you don't have to look at me wipe my nose a couple of times. But this is Dale Willerton, the lease coach. So who is the tenant entity? It should not be you personally. It should not be John Smith. It should be Smith Enterprises, Inc. or Smith Enterprises, LLC. Make sure your personal name is not on there. And tenants, I still see this to this very day. Tenants don't understand that they should not be the tenant. Permitted use, lots of arguments over permitted use, what you can sell, what you cannot sell in your restaurant. And so take a look at your permitted use clause right now during your renewal and decide whether or not you need to add something to it, okay? Because it kind of segues into exclusivity in the sense that if someone's going to buy your restaurant and you're selling pizza and pasta and you don't have an exclusivity, they're going to balk at that. They're going to want to make sure they don't get competition coming into the space. Signage is a really, really big issue. Most tenants don't have appropriate signage, and that's because it never appeared in the letter of intent or the offer to lease. It was negotiated later when it was almost too late. You know those pylon signs that sit out at the end of the road, where all the tenants are kind of like a panel on the pylon sign? There might be 7 or 8 or 9 panels. I did for a restaurant, this was about a year ago. I negotiated for the landlord to literally take their name, the name of the plaza was at the top of the pylon sign. I mean, sitting on top of the pylon sign, like a 3D thing. I negotiated for the landlord to take that off and put my client's restaurant name at the top of the pylon sign. And so now that's the first thing you see when you drive up to the property or the plaza. Parking, oftentimes parking is overlooked. Don't assume that parking is all, if you got free parking right now, is the landlord going to turn around and start charging for parking, or is he going to do too many restaurants? I have a client in San Antonio. When I went to see them in San Antonio, their restaurant, they were in a very nice plaza, but the plaza had a disproportionate number of restaurants. The landlord, instead of having, 7 different types of tenants, he had like 6 restaurants and 1 retailer. Well, the problem was there was no parking for anybody. They would make a reservation at my client's restaurant. They would drive up. They couldn't find parking. They'd come inside, cancel their reservation, and drive away. Okay, so think about your parking in advance, because I'm a car guard. If I drive up in my Porsche and I don't have a place to park, how can I come in and eat at your restaurant? Okay, some common area costs, common area management fees. If you occupy 12% of a property, then normally you would pay for 12% of the operating costs, 12% of the common area maintenance. That's normal, but it doesn't mean the landlord is charging you fair. You have to be able to look at those charges. The biggest hand in the cookie jar moment we see is if the building is 20% vacant, the landlord is supposed to pay for 20% of the common area maintenance fees, but often we find that they don't. They turn that back onto the other tenants, and of course you don't want that. All right, assignment rights. One of the most important clauses you need to negotiate is the assignment clause in your lease agreement. The assignment clause is what's going to let you sell your restaurant, assign the lease agreement, and move on. Now, I could spend an hour just giving a seminar on assignment clauses, how to negotiate them. Here's what I want you to understand. Almost all leases have an assignment clause. The problem is they're almost all wrong or worded poorly, or going to come back and bite you at the end of the day. For example, the landlord can assign the lease agreement conditionally. And one of their conditions is that the buyer of your restaurant must have the same or greater net worth than you have. Well, that isn't the way it works in the real world. In the real world, the $1 million restaurant owner is selling to the $200,000 personal net worth restaurant owner. And so the landlord comes back and says, well, why would we take, that guy as our tenant when we've got you on the hook? You're worth 5 times what he's worth. These are the actual negotiations we go through. Your assignment clause is really, really vital. Okay, just having one though isn't enough. It's got to be worded properly. The key here is it should say the landlord will not unreasonably withhold their consent to an assignment. I would say 30% of all leases say the landlord can, at their sole discretion, withhold the assignment. And now they're going to screw with you. It doesn't mean they won't approve. This is really the takeaway point on this one. It doesn't mean the landlord won't approve your assignment, but they will use the opportunity to raise the rent or to negotiate for a bigger deposit or things like that. So they know all the tricks of the trade. Demolition upon termination, you're going to have to tear the place apart, possibly. And there's often disputes with the landlord over this. If you took over a restaurant that had some equipment, do you own that equipment? Do you think you own it? What do you have in writing? Okay, it's not good enough, that you have a bill of sale that the owner of the restaurant sold you the equipment. The landlord may think some of that equipment is theirs, and this is a real nightmare. This happens all the time, and one of my clients is fighting with the landlord right now because they never took care of this when they did their first lease before they came to me. They just bought the restaurant, assumed that they owned all the equipment, and never got that in writing with the landlord. So you want to be careful about that type of thing. I have another situation where we got the landlord to sell us all the equipment in the business for $1. Okay, so now you officially do own it. Personal guarantees, we talked about that a little bit. It's coming up on your screen. You really should not have to put up a personal guarantee in most cases, but it's normal for the landlord to ask for it. It's normal for the landlord to say this is a deal breaker. Sometimes it's because they've taken a mortgage on their property and they've told the mortgage holder that they will get personal guarantees from all their tenants, but it's not good for you. It's not warranted. Deposits, most of our tenants don't pay a deposit. If we're negotiating their lease renewal, we will negotiate to get their deposit back. I had a client that I said to him, one of our other coaches did his project, and I said, well, what did we do for you? He said, well, you did a couple of things for me. He said, you got me a rent reduction, you got me a tenant allowance on my renewal, you made my personal guarantee go away, and you got my deposit back. He said, I never thought I'd ever see that. Okay, there's a lot to negotiate. Phantom space. Have you ever measured your space? Most of you are paying rent per square foot, and some of you don't have as many square feet as the lease agreement says. I have literally made hundreds of thousands of dollars measuring space for tenants and getting those discrepancies corrected. Where the lease says you have 2,847 square feet, we measure it and you've got 2,467 square feet. There's hundreds of square feet missing. And so the landlord is, getting that money not just in the rent, but in the CAM as well. Let's get along to a couple more mistakes. Number 10, asking to renew or making the initial renewal proposal or giving a letter of intent to the landlord. You don't want to be the pitcher. When you're negotiating a lease agreement, I position my clients to be the batter, okay? The lease coach makes the landlord re-earn your tenancy. We don't serve it up to them on a silver platter. You want the landlord to send you a proposal, because from that proposal or from that lease amending document or from that renewal agreement, you can make counter offers. That's how we often get, such great deals for our clients. We don't pitch, we bat. That's our position on the field. Mistake number 11, looking too successful. By the way, by what you say, causing a rent increase on your renewal term. When I was a shopping center manager working for landlords, one of the most common reasons we would raise your rent was because as a shopping center tenant, you were reporting your sales, and we could see how well your sales were going up. We could see that when you first leased the space in the mall 10 years ago, you were driving a Chevrolet. Now you're maybe driving, a Maserati or something more expensive, maybe a high-end Mercedes. The landlords simultaneously. A landlord will give one tenant a rent increase and give another tenant a rent decrease. They might even be side by side. When you're negotiating a lease, it's not about what's fair. It's about what you negotiate, okay? So be careful what you say. Be careful what you say. Mistake number 12, not doing your homework by talking to other tenants. I do this all the time. So sometimes I will phone up 4 or 5 or 6 tenants in a building, and I'll say, look, I'm a consultant working with your neighbor Jim, and I'm negotiating Jim's renewal, and I'd like to know how are you doing? Oh, well, I just finished my lease renewal last month. Really? Tell me about it. Or we're not going to renew. We're going to move out in 4 months when our lease expires. If you do your homework, you're going to be in a much better position. Remember, you know what you pay for rent, but the landlord knows what every tenant in the building pays for rent. The landlord knows who's in rent arrears. The landlord knows who's not renewing their lease. And so strategically and tactically, Having that intel, having that information is really going to help you do a better lease deal. Mistake number 13, not getting the right professional help you need. Well, who can help? So that's a picture of me. I don't have a nosebleed on that screen, on that picture, so I'm leaving it up there. But I'm still fighting my nosebleed right now, so I'm not putting my live photo up on the screen. Sometimes family members will help you. The problem with having a family member help you out with a lease renewal or with something like that is that they may be smarter than you, but they're usually only about 10% smarter than you, okay? Remember, the landlord does this for a living. Real estate agents, well, most of the time, real estate agents are not involved in lease renewals because real estate agents charge a commission to the landlord, and the landlord does not want to pay a commission on your lease renewal. You're already in the property, right? So these aren't really two practical ways to get help. Attorneys, well, I do see a lot of tenants that have lawyered up and regretted it because you're not suing your landlord. This is not about a legal maneuver. It's about a real estate transaction. If you look, when I drive around Texas or Florida or California or New York doing site selection for my clients, on the building, it doesn't say for a lease, call the landlord's attorney. It says for a lease, call the landlord's real estate broker or real estate agent. So sometimes you do have to use an attorney, but not typically in the lease renewal process. Or, of course, you can hire a professional lease consultant like the lease coach. This is what I do for a living. This is all that I do. And people say, well, Dale, what does it cost me to hire the lease coach? Well, you know what? The answer is, what will it cost you if you don't hire the lease coach? What will it cost you if you don't get some professional help? At the lease coach, we take no commission. We only work for tenants. We only get paid by tenants. So there's no conflict of interest. You know that we're in your corner. You know that we want to get you the best deal possible. We're not here to please the landlord or to get paid by the landlord. We only work for the tenant. And that's a big part of our success. On your screen, you see a testimonial. The lease coach negotiated one of our restaurant lease renewals and saved us $30,000 per year. On top of the financial benefit, Dale is also a nice guy, and to some people, that's still very important. Now, this franchisee has 7 locations. He hired me for several of them, and this is one of his testimonials. Do you know how he thanked me? Other than paying me my fee, he thanked me by inviting me back to speak to the local restaurant association in his city of about 1 million people, because that's how grateful he was. Look at those savings. This is what you want when you go through our renewal process. One of my favorite clients, Pamper Brazilian Steakhouse, they've used us to open up every single one of their locations, and you can see in red there, this was last year, this was pre-pandemic, we just hired the lease coach for 4 more locations, okay? That's exactly what makes our world go around. On your screen, you're seeing a picture of me in the middle with my second book on this subject. So my For Dummies book is actually my 3rd book. And on the left, we've got Mark Victor Hansen. On the right, we've got Jack Canfield. They are co-authors of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And when I wanted to write my first book on leasing for tenants, I didn't know how to get it published. Mark Victor Hansen told me that 25 publishers turned down Chicken Soup for the Soul. 25 publishers didn't want to publish it, and they've sold over 120 million copies. I thought, well, who's going to publish my book? So I made a very earnest pledge to God. I said, God, if you get my book published and into bookstores, I will donate all royalties to church and charity. And about a year later, my first book was in bookstores. I hadn't even started writing it yet. I hadn't even started talking to publishers. So when you talk about getting some professional help, I got some professional help on how to write it from these guys, some professional help from God, getting it into bookstores and getting it published. And so this career as the lease coach is really a passion career for me. This is not a job. But one of the reasons I'm so good at what I do is because this is what I was meant to do, helping tenants and getting paid to do that. On this testimony, you'll see the lease coach in yellow. The lease coach negotiated Bagaris' rental rate for his upcoming lease renewal option, resulting in a savings of $100,000 over 10 years. Well, that's what you want, right? Charge you a few $1,000s, save you $100,000. That's what this is all about in this game. So some of you are thinking, gee, I might want to get some help. I might want to reach out to Dale. We do offer some coaching cash good until the end of the month. These are the discounts that are going to come up. Now, at the bottom of your screen, a couple points I want to make. When you hire the lease coach, there is no time limit on the project. It can take 2 months. It can take 2 years. It takes as long as it takes until you sign a lease. Then we work on multiple locations simultaneously. So if you were thinking of moving or you had to move, we can create competition for your landlord. You pick the sites and we get proposals from the landlords. Now, when you hire the lease coach, you can make 6 monthly progress payments as the work is being done, because most of you are going to hire me 6 or 12 months out before your lease actually expires. And the last point on your screen, we only work for you and we take no payment from landlords. And that's really, really critical. So we have an actual rate sheet that I can send to you, but coming up on your screen, you can see we've got package 1, the coaching package. This is where we coach and mentor and review your documents and help you through the process of negotiating your renewal. Package 2, the negotiating package, where we take charge and we negotiate directly with your landlord for you. And of course, package 3 is our site selection and negotiating package, where I fly to your city, I do your site selection, I do a deal, take care of everything. A couple of months ago, we added a new project. This is our pandemic rent assistance project, brand new. So it's $1,500, and for 45 to 60 days, we will negotiate with your landlord to get you a rent assistance package, deferral, abatement, or a combination thereof. And that's something we've added exclusively because of the pandemic. And you can see on the bottom of the screen, we do a 39-point lease document review. I think the document review that we do is better than any review done by an attorney, because an attorney is, and I'm not slighting attorneys, but the attorneys are typically looking for legalese. They're looking for, is it legal, for this clause to appear? Well, I'm less concerned about the legality. I'm concerned about trying to make the lease agreement more in favor of the tenant. Okay, some of these lease agreements that they're 50, 60, 70 pages long. Yours may be 10 pages. A shorter lease agreement is not necessarily better. Okay, ideally, what we want is a well thought out lease agreement will help you avoid future disagreement. That's what you want. Okay, so now we're coming up to the end of the webinar, and we're going to be taking a couple of questions. I'm still not putting my picture up on the screen because I still have a little bit of a bloody nose, but I want you to know that you can email me at dalewillerton@theleasecoach.com, mention this session, this date, this webinar. You can request a complimentary copy of my book and a free consult. And I'll talk to you and give you some advice and guidance, and you may take and run with that, or you may turn around and come back and get a little bit of help from us. But in leasing, restaurant tenants don't get what they deserve; they get what they negotiate. So, remember that there's nothing wrong with negotiating hard and negotiating long. So, Andrea, if you are there and you're coming back on, I'm not sure if we have any questions coming in yet for the lease coach.
Hi, Dale. Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much. Just one question so far, and they asked, how much negotiating ability do you lose if you had not been paying your rent or only partial rent during the pandemic?
That's a really key question. I might have to add that to my presentation. You don't necessarily lose any leverage, because when a tenant comes to me, let's say, so here's the answer. This is really important. Listen to this answer. When a tenant comes to me and says, Dale, I need a rent reduction, I need rent assistance, I need rent help, I'm going to say to them, are you current on your rent or are you behind? Now, a lot of them are still current. They put a second mortgage on their house. They've used the PPP. They've borrowed funds from their relative. Many of the people that come to me, they need rent assistance, but they're current. And the very first thing we do is we don't pay the rent, or we short pay the rent. But we don't do it silently. I approach the landlord and I say, I'm sorry. The good news is, the bad news is the tenant can't pay the full rent this month. The good news is he can pay 25%, and here's the check for it. So if you're not in rent arrears to the landlord, where's the problem? There is no problem, right? So being in rent arrears does not necessarily mean you have poor leverage. If it's used properly, it actually gives you more leverage, but it may not be, one of my advantages is I'm not emotionally involved in the restaurant. My family doesn't work at the restaurant. I don't, I can be much more objective. I can look at the profit and loss statement, explain it to the landlord, and get you help. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Perfect. That was great. Thanks so much. And it looks like that's our only question. So I think we're done unless you have any last notes you want to add, Dale?
I'll make one last comment, Andrea. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been in the industry so long, and God has given me a lot of common sense and a lot of intuition. And I really think it'll be, next summer 2021, before the turnaround begins for most of you. I have clients right now, Andrea, in the pizza pasta industry that are doing, fairly well in the pandemic, because those are such common takeout and delivery items. But my clients who have a fine steakhouse or or sushi restaurants, right? They're having a lot more difficulty because those weren't takeaway kind of items at the time. And so, Andrea, there's sort of a saying in the media right now, and this started, the last restaurant show I spoke at was March the 10th this year in New York. And then two days later, they shut down Broadway and, everything like that. There's a saying right now, and you hear it on the news all the time, we're all going through this pandemic together, but we're not all going through it at the same time, okay? Different states are at different phases. Some of them are locked down, and some of them, I was talking to one of my clients that they can't even open the bar section of the restaurant. They can have the restaurant open, but not the bar section. Others haven't even reopened because it's just not worth their time and energy. They're not getting enough business. So, that's what you want to be sensitive to. And we've got, the Lease Coach has offices in California, Dallas, New York, and Florida, and of course in Canada as well.
Got it. And I'm sorry, Dale, we have one more question that just popped in. Do you have a minute?
No, absolutely.
Okay, great. So the question is, how do you work with companies with multiple locations all coming up for renewal individually over the next year or two? We are current on all obligations and have 4 locations within a 15-mile radius.
Well, this actually happens quite often because, as I said earlier, a lot of our work is 50% of our clients are franchise restaurants. Okay, and the average franchisee has 3 or 4 locations. So we will take on all your projects and take on all your landlords. If a tenant, earlier in the webinar, I put up my fees. If a tenant hires us for multiple projects simultaneously, we give you a special discount, or because if I have to phone you up and talk to you, it's just as easy to talk to you about 3 locations as it is to talk to you about 1 location. So many of our clients, even if they have a lease expiring in 6 months and they got another lease expiring in 12 months and another lease expiring in 18 months, they'll hire us for all 3 packages at once. And we sort of do a package deal, and they pay over time, and we go to work. So don't overthink it. That's a pretty common week for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think that was our last question. So I wanted to say thank you very much, Dale, for your presentation and for sharing your expertise with our group. A quick reminder to our attendees, the session has been recorded, so if you'd like to revisit the content, you can do that on our website, flrestaurantandlodgingshow.com. And please be sure to check out the remainder of the sessions that we'll be running today. So thanks again, Dale.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Andrea. Bye, everybody. Give me a phone call.